about it. Every day is a chance to put things right, to start educating those around us, to start recognizing privilege. And the thing is, privilege isn't a scary word. You all have privilege, especially if you're not LGBTQ+. If you've never had to think about which public toilet you're allowed to use, that's privilege. If you've never had to carefully consider your choice of holiday destinations because there's a risk you could be arrested, detained, or even face a death penalty for being who you are, that's a privilege. And the language you use on a daily basis to freely and easily describe yourself is a privilege. It's with your privilege that you can really help to make your workplace more inclusive. But we must also be careful with language. And while sometimes we can have every intention of saying something nice to someone, we can actually be having the opposite effect. Microaggressions are essentially ways of communicating, and they can be insensitive statements, assumptions about people, or even questions. Questions which are loaded with hostility, negativity, or some kind of bias. And the thing is, microaggressions don't have to be intentional. They can be unintentional too. And why do we use them? Well, in a way, they're like a snapshot into how we think, the people that we are, how we see the world or place value on others. They typically follow a similar sort of format, a bit like a formula. Because you are X, you aren't or are Y. For example, when I first came out and people found out I was trans, they would say things like, wow, you look beautiful for a trans woman. That's the typical sort of microaggression formula. Because I'm a trans woman, my beauty is not equal to that of a cisgender woman. That it's somehow inferior, that my existence as a trans woman somehow makes me, a second-class citizen. I mean, what is beauty anyway? We all know it's subjective, but it gives an insight into a person and how they think, how they place value on me. In this case, that they don't value trans women in the same way that they value cisgender women. And it could have been an unconscious bias, but it's a bias nonetheless. Something else I've been asked is, who is the butch one? As if a complete stranger is owed an explanation into my private life. That somehow a relationship is doomed if there isn't a masculine one taking charge. And whilst I know they didn't mean to offend and that they were just curious, it's being mindful of whether the words match the intended meaning. If you do hear someone using microaggressions towards someone that's LGBTQ+, for example, don't be afraid to say something. Explain why it would be harmful or offensive to the recipient. And if you can, provide an alternative. And it doesn't even have to happen when LGBTQ+ people are there. It could be when you overhear a colleague talking about someone else. Being able to step in, being able to challenge someone like that and say, well, actually, no, you shouldn't really be saying that. That's active allyship. That's actively stepping in and saying, no, we can't and we shouldn't be using language like that. That's not trying to change language. That's not being woke. That's just having your colleagues back. That's understanding how words can be harmful and create a negative culture within your workplace environment. Now, some people are probably thinking that because of things like these microaggressions, you really can't say anything or that you'll be cancelled for saying the wrong thing. No, nobody is saying that. In fact, those sorts of defensive reactions or attitudes can stem from privilege. Maybe you've never been on the receiving end of such comments. Maybe you've never had to explain yourself to someone, even though it's none of their business. Maybe you've never been othered by society and you use language which already includes you. Above all else, it's not about you. So please don't center yourself in the struggles of others. And research has shown that microaggressions do have a big impact on mental health and physical health. They erode confidence, they degrade. And you may have heard people often talk about the snowflake generation, that they can't handle a bit of criticism or banter, that remarks are blown way out of proportion. But Gen Z, for example, are in tune with social injustices. When they leave a job because of things like microaggressions, bullying, or discrimination, it's not because they're soft. It's because they value and respect themselves. They're not willing to put up with toxic, inflammatory, or even abusive behaviors or attitudes. They go on to an employer that does value them, that does respect them, and they thrive. Everyone needs to be included in language. It's not a hierarchy or some sort of elite members club. Language is open to all. And to ensure that your workplace environment attracts the best candidates and that everyone thrives, using inclusive language is vital. It shows that you see them. And that does mean having to think about your own attitudes and potential bias. What we have learned, we can unlearn. The moment we realize that something's no longer fit for purpose, it only exists to benefit the privileged. So how do we make sure our language is actually inclusive? Well, the answer is something I mentioned right at the start when I said to you about how you describe yourself and how it's a lot different now to how you describe yourself 10 years ago or even when you were a child. Your language evolved. As you evolved, you essentially had software updates throughout your entire lives. You just never realized. Those updates armed you with fresh developments for the next stages. And that process, the need to keep learning, to keep improving, is ongoing. I mean, why consciously choose to stop? Why decide, actually, I think I'm going to skip the next software update because I don't see the point? I mean, we've all experienced it on our phones or laptops, haven't we? When we get yet another update that's just there flashing at you when you're just trying to get on with your work. But software updates are never so direct or blatant. A lot of the time, they tweak things behind the scenes, creating a much more inclusive, accessible, and welcoming environment for everyone. So if you can evolve language for yourself and capitalize on the benefits of upgrades, then we all have a duty to make sure we're up to date for others too, so we can all exist in the same welcoming environment together. And that's where we start. And along the way, yeah, there'll be mistakes. That's a given. As with any learning, it's important to recognize that it's okay to make those mistakes. What matters is that you're learning from those mistakes too. If you're unsure of language or terminology, just ask. It really is that easy. Because by doing so, not only are you learning, you're showing respect to the person you're asking. You're saying, I'm a bit out of my depth here. It's all new to me, but I want to do right by you. When I came out, I didn't know what all the letters in the LGBTQ+ acronym stood for. I didn't suddenly wake up with that knowledge. I had to go and educate myself. And acknowledging our own power and privilege is one thing, but so is recognizing our own weaknesses or gaps in knowledge. And it doesn't make you less of a person. Remember, a new iPhone can work on an older operating system, but it will excel with the latest one. So I want to finish by asking you this. Are you going to go looking for the latest software updates for yourself by being proactive, willing to learn and to actively seek change? Or are you simply going to sit and wait until the very last moment, putting it off, maybe even ignoring it completely, trying to resist changes to your own operating system just because it's a comfort bubble for you, but no one else? Thank you for your time.